We practice in the Potteries the fine old English plan of not calling things by their names. We are one town, one unseparated mass of streets. We are, in fact, the 12th largest town in the United Kingdom, though you'd never guess it. And the chief of our retail commerce and of our amusements are congregated in the centre of our town, as the custom is. But do not imagine that we will be content to call ourselves one town. No, we pretend that we are 6 towns. And to carry out that pretense, we have 6 town halls, 6 mayors or chief bailiffs, 6 sanitary inspectors, 6 everything, including 6 jealousies. We find it so much more economical, convenient, and dignified in dealing with public health, education, and railway, canal, and tramway companies to act by means of 6 mutually jealous authorities. To understand the Potteries, it is necessary to dip into geology and geography, these 2 sciences being, in fact, the key to nearly all human history. If you look at a geological map of Staffordshire, you'll see at the northern end of this county, amid expanses of brown, which means sandstone, and blue, which means limestone, a solitary little triangular patch of dark grey, which means coal. The Potteries is in the middle of that patch. Geology has set it apart. And if you look at an ordinary map of Staffordshire, you will see that the Potteries is cut off from the rest of England on the north by wild and hilly moorlands, and on the south by the remains of ancient forests. You will see also that there is no navigable river anywhere near it. In brief, it has got lost in the very middle of the island. And if you looked at ancient maps, you'd see that the roads to it were few, and that in particular Watling Street passed far to the south on its way to Chester and far to the north on its way to York. The Potteries is the Potteries because on that precise spot of the surface of the British Empire there were deposits of clay and quick-burning coal close to the surface. If this was not an invitation on the part of nature to make pots, what was it? Wherever the clay and coal were found close together, there a town sprang up. It was only a tiny town because 9 or 10 centuries ago the demand for pots was limited and the processes of manufacture primitive. And each tiny town kept itself to itself, because the landscape was hilly and irregular, it was not a smooth plain, and the roads were naught but mule tracks. Cut off from the surrounding country in spirit by the peculiarity of its manufacture, and in body by the difficulty of access and its wild environment, the Potteries was indeed isolated. It acquired through centuries the habit of solitude. It was an island in an island. And even when, in the 18th century, the canals of England were dug, the Potteries had difficulty in connecting itself with the outer world. Newcastle-under-Lyme objected to canals. I have not yet mentioned Newcastle-under-Lyme, which is a very ancient town lying just to the west of the Potteries on a piece of ground where there is a fault in the coal deposits. A clean town, aristocratic. It was sending 2 members to Parliament in the 14th century. It is said locally, with what truth I know not, that my family is descended on the paternal side from James Brindley, the 18th century canal engineer, who used to be called Schemer Brindley in the Potteries, not because he intrigued, but because he schemed schemes, chiefly for canals. The tale is that he made as many miles of canals as there are days in the year. Well, the Potteries had to fight hard and long with its old-fashioned neighbour, Newcastle, before it could possess itself of such a new-fashioned convenience as a canal. The same with railways. The main line, now the London and North Western, that runs from London through Stafford to the north, ought to have gone right through the Potteries on its way to Crewe. But it didn't. The stronger influences were against railways, and the line was diverted through fields and villages that had no special need of it. On the 28 miles between Stafford and Crewe of the four-track way of the greatest line in England, not a town, and a solid population of 250,000 within gunshot. English methods, that is to say, the preposterous side of English methods. Hence, the Potteries had to construct a railway of its own. It did construct a railway of its own, the North Staffordshire, which eventually became so important that the North Western had to run its expresses over it. And today, when you return from your visit, the express will rush you without a stop over the 146 miles between Stoke and Euston in 3 hours or less. This is travelling. This is a sign of the great change.
From the death of Simon Fuge. We were able to talk about this. We were able to talk about the singular scenery of coal dust, pot shards, flame and steam through which the train wound its way. It was squalid ugliness, but it was squalid ugliness on a scale so vast and overpowering that it became sublime. Great furnaces gleamed red in the twilight, and their fires were reflected in horrible black canals. Processions of heavy vapour drifted in all directions across the sky over what acres of mean and miserable brown architecture. The air was alive with the most extraordinary, weird, gigantic sounds. I do not think the 5 Towns will ever be described. Dante lived too soon.
When the Manchester Express sets you down at Stoke-on-Trent station, which is the traffic centre of the district, you can within 5 minutes feel the dirt of the Potteries sticking to your skin. You see about you a determined and, perhaps to you, somewhat brusque population which eyes you with provincial cautiousness, as if to say, "What are you doing here?" You may leave the station and travel through miles and miles and yet miles of streets, chiefly muddy with a black mud, and see nothing but tramcars whizzing up and down between endless buildings obviously not designed by Christopher Wren or Inigo Jones. And rearing up behind the buildings, 10,000 chimneys, each trying to send black smoke to paradise, and not succeeding. If you escape from the streets, you'll fall into huge cinder wastes, or lose yourself among artificial mountain ranges of mine refuse. And when you do get a view of a distant horizon, that horizon will surely be crowned by a pithead and a scarf of smoke, and the intervening rural country will have the colour not of grass, but of dried peas. And you will find everywhere the same bland spirit of making it do. My native heath, thanks to the enterprise of London newspapers and the indestructibility of picturesque lies, has the reputation of being quite unlike the rest of England. But when I set foot in it after absence, it seems to me the most English piece of England that I ever came across. With extraordinary clearness I see it as absurdly, ridiculously, splendidly English. All the English characteristics are quite remarkably exaggerated in the Potteries. We're only just a tiny bit more English than you, that's all. And the Potteries is English industry in little, a glass for English manufacture to see itself in. Besides, when we like, we can produce the finest earthenware in the world. In an earthenware manufactory they have, after 12 centuries, thoroughly learned one lesson, namely, that clay is a living thing, and therefore enigmatic. Indeed, it presents so many enigmas that the potters have had to divide their forces and attack the creature by installments. A plate may appear to you a ridiculously simple article, and you think that if you had to make it, you would just dig up the right sort of clay, fashion it, and burn it. But the right sort of clay does not naturally exist. The basis of every earthenware manufactory is a workshop where bearded and reverend men thoughtfully examine several different natural sorts of clay and cause them to be mixed together by the brute force of machines, in the hope that the product will be white and serviceable. These men are grey. They've grown grey in the vain study of bits of their Mother Earth, which still not seldom play them tricks, and they are the descendants of similar men. Well, these men have naught to do with the shaping of clay. Oh, they would be capable of looking at a plate and saying, "What is this? I've never seen such a thing." Their affair is only with clay in the shapeless form. Another set of men take up the attack when the time comes for persuading clay to assume definite forms. Machinery helps them, but merely as a brainless servant. In many manufactures, the man is servant of the machine. It will probably never be so in pottery. The fingers of these men and boys are finer tools than any wood or metal could be. See the boy pull off a piece of clay from the big lump and roll it. Watch his fingers. That boy's fingers might be 1,200 years old in skill. Look away, look back, and lo, what was a hunch of clay is a little plate, and there is no clay left over. See the man nearby making a mug with his fingers over a revolving table. The mug grows like a flower. The man seems to be drawing it upwards by magic out of the table. The table comes to a standstill, and there the mug is perfect. See the miner workers carrying off these soft and fragile vessels. If you or I touched one of them, the result would be ruin. And we come back to yet another set of students of clay, the men who imprison the clay, now in the form of vessels, but entirely useless as such, in a vast fiery inferno, the men who victimize clay, who change clay so effectually that it can by no chemical process ever be changed back again to its original state. These men are more mystically priest-like than the others. They often work at night. Once a job is begun, they never under any consideration leave it until it's finished. A single indiscretion and thousands of pounds worth of moulded clay may be rendered futile and valueless. And they themselves do not know what is going on in the inferno which they've created. They can only hope that the clay under the ordeal of fire is not behaving too obstreperously. For it is obvious they may not enter their own inferno to see how affairs are moving. They have to guess. They are very good guessers. They've been guessing since before the Norman conquest of England. But a guess remains a guess. And when they let the fire down, their pessimism or their optimism asserts itself, and during the cooling period torments or enheartens them. The cooling period is long, nearly a couple of days, and even then the ovens are so hot that you or I could not enter them without fainting. But the potter, stripped to the waist, enters nonchalantly the ghostly interior, lined and piled with pale martyred vessels, and carries them out in parcels. And at last, in the light of day, the experts can regard the clay and decide whether it has beaten them again. It always does beat them to a certain extent. What is this yellow stain on this teapot? Nobody can tell. A caprice of the clay's freakish protest against fire. Sometimes a whole oven full of stuff is damaged, sometimes only a small percentage, but never, never does the entire consignment of clay behave as it was expected to behave, and as it ought to behave. And even now your simple, easy-looking plate is far from achieved. It looks rather more like a whitewashed dog biscuit than a plate. It generally has to be decorated, at any rate it has to be glazed, and it has to go through the ordeal of fire at least once more, perhaps twice more. And each further process is a new opportunity for the clay to prove its intractableness and its unforeseeableness. And each further process is presided over by lifelong students of just that particular part of the clay's evolution. Even the packer, sitting among straw and wrapping up each piece separately and protecting the clay from itself, has to know quite a lot about the willfulness of earthenware when subjected to certain strains. Earthenware will often maintain itself intact in a railroad smash, only to shatter in the delicate touch of a general servant aged 19. Have you not heard her say, "Please, the handle came off in my hand"? To the very last, clay is incalculable. No person of imagination who has taken the trouble to follow with intelligence the odyssey of clay, from its stratum in the earth to its apotheosis on the domestic table, can pick up a simple plate without a certain emotion. The clay of it is indeed dead, But what adventures led up to its fiery demise, and what human associations are embedded in its everlasting rigidity? Strange that Five Towns children do not play at being potters.